What's up guys, and welcome to a slightly different episode of Career Mode today. And I thought that seeing as I am literally about 3 seasons behind some people now, it was time to wrap up this first season of Career Mode. So I'm going to be taking you from the Italian Grand Prix all the way through to the Brazilian Grand Prix, and then in tomorrow's Career Mode episode I'm going to be doing a 50% race for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and giving this series the send-off it deserves. So yeah, starting off in Italy, then we go to Singapore, Russia, Japan, then over to the Americas, catching up with the real-life season in the USA and Mexico, before finally going to Brazil for the penultimate round of the season. So for a little bit of context, this is how the championship is looking going into Ferrari's home race. Ferrari are a long way ahead in the constructors' standings, nearly 150 points of Mercedes, and we are 11 points clear of our teammate Sebastian Vettel as we go into the final 8 rounds of the season. In terms of the development as well, we were still at the top of the tree, ahead of Mercedes and Red Bull, but it was very tight between the 3 of us, and yeah, we were quite a long way ahead of anybody else. We'd also decided to take a new power unit ahead of this weekend in Monza, of course the biggest power track on the entire calendar, so it was vital that we had that straight line performance. So it was time for the race at Monza, and there was big pressure on myself and Vettel, of course, performing in front of our home crowd in such a successful season as well. And we did manage to take a 1-2 on Saturday, but it was Sebastian Vettel who just edged ahead of us by a couple of tenths of a second. But now getting towards the 5 red lights at Monza, it was a reasonable start from ourselves, but as we got into the second phase of the start, we were actually passed by Daniel Ricciardo, and then Valtteri Bottas fancied to go at us into turn 1. We were too conservative under braking, and all of a sudden we were down from 2nd into 4th. Come lap 4 though, we were closing in on Daniel Ricciardo, and our teammate was really getting away at the front, so it was vital that we got the move done on the Red Bull man, who ran wide into the second chicane. Then on to lap 8, when the safety car actually came out, and this was just at the end of the round of pit stops, but fortunately we managed to hold position in P3, and as we got towards the end of lap 10, the safety car was about to come in, and we got a very poor getaway, which meant that we couldn't get ahead of Bottas into P2. A couple of laps down the road though, and just over 1 lap left in the race, Bottas finally went for a move on our teammate Sebastian Vettel, and in fact pulled it off to get the Mercedes man into P1. We were now under pressure from Lewis Hamilton, and it was turning from Ferrari domination into a Mercedes comeback. Fortunately though, we managed to fend off Hamilton into the Parabolica to keep P3. The final lap saw Vettel able to do nothing about Valtteri Bottas's victory, and we came home in P3, or so we thought. All of a sudden, it was telling us we were in P6. Now at this point I'm very confused, but one thing that couldn't be argued with was that Valtteri Bottas was the deserved winner of this Grand Prix. So we went into the race director and saw that we had a severe collision with Valtteri Bottas on lap 10, causing a 5-second penalty for ourselves. Now I thought I'd look into this and just run through the entirety of lap 10, because I don't remember us ever colliding with Bottas on lap 10, so I thought, you know what, I'll speed it up, and we'll be able to get a good representation of exactly what happened on lap 10 and whether we had a penalty appear on our screen at all. Because although I didn't remember it, I thought I'll look back through the recording. I might have just, not paid attention to it because I was so engrossed in the actual racing. But now you can see the first part of the lap, we haven't got near to Bottas and nothing has come up on our screen to say that we've got any sort of penalty. And now getting towards the final point of the lap, this is what I actually showed in the original footage. And of course we got such a poor exit, so we didn't even get near to Bottas. And I was absolutely baffled as to where that penalty came from. So there was nothing we could do about that, and as a result, we finished in P6, which lost us 10 points to our teammate Vettel, meaning he's now only 1 point behind us in the championship. But fortunately for the constructors' standings, it doesn't have too many ramifications because we're still over 130 points ahead of Mercedes. So the European season was over, and after that shambles of a Grand Prix in terms of stewarding, I was happy to get into Singapore. Unfortunately, Red Bull came with some quite big upgrades here, leaving them in a front row lockout, and myself and Vettel had to settle for 3rd and 4th. I was hoping to clear those Red Bulls at the start because the Ferrari race pace has been electric this season, and as we got off the mark on those Hypersoft tyres compared to the Ultrasofts which the Red Bulls were on, Vettel did manage to take advantage of that compound of tyre, getting ahead of Verstappen, but we just could not do the same ourselves. And we literally could not keep pace with our teammate or the Red Bulls. It was absolutely baffling. We were so far ahead of Hulkenberg in P5, but making no inroads on the top 3. End of lap 4, start of lap 5 saw us come in for our one and only pit stop, getting those hypersofts off and getting onto the ultras. Now, we got a little bit held up in the pit phase, but shouldn't do us too much damage. And sure enough, we found ourselves behind Sebastian Vettel, and we had this massive train of cars, none of which had pitted yet. And thank God for it, because we managed to close right up to the back end of our teammate Vettel. Lap 8 now, and still none of those cars have pitted, and we decided to go for an audacious lunge down the inside, making contact with Grosjean, fortunately not affecting his race, but fortunately we did get ahead of our teammate Vettel, vital for the championship. Eventually we managed to get to the front of this train of cars. Vettel was pretty much following us through, but then Brendan Hartley, who was heading the train, his engine conked out on lap 11, meaning that we were back up into P3. That didn't last too long though, because our teammate absolutely rinsed us on the straight. You can see in the bottom right hand corner we've got a little yellow mark on our ERS deployment, and that was because we'd actually sustained some quite severe wear on the ERS. So you can see on the engine management that we were 60% wear on the MG UK, meaning we were getting pretty much no deployment, which, yeah, isn't too useful. So we were staring at a penalty in the next Grand Prix in Russia, and we'd lost ground to our teammate Sebastian Vettel. All in all, not the greatest of Grand Prix. One other alarming thing was just how much of a gap the Red Bulls got up at the front, and I think that showed just how dangerous they're going to be in the final part of the season. They won't be getting near us in the drivers' standings though, but we had succumbed the lead to Sebastian Vettel, and he was now 2 points ahead of us. So we came to Russia for round 16 of the championship, looking to seize the lead of the Drivers' Championship back. But it was going to be very difficult because we had a 30 place grid penalty for replacing all of our engine components for this Grand Prix. And as well as that, we actually had news of a regulation change, which meant that we had to spend a lot of resource points on conserving all of those durability parts that we had purchased throughout the course of the season. But we did have one upgrade, and it was in the aerodynamics department, which should hopefully help us this weekend. Now, in our absence at the front of the grid, our teammate Sebastian Vettel took P2 and was looking to extend his lead at the top. And from this point onwards in the season as well, we'd actually changed the race distance to 5 laps, which made it even more difficult for us to charge through the field. But still, we went to the 5 red lights, hoping for the best and to get ahead of these back markers early on in the race. And I can tell you, it didn't disappoint. We got past Hartley before we made it to turn 2, and then everyone just broke really early, meaning that we got up to P13 after the first braking zone. We then went round the outside of Fernando Alonso before getting the run on Grosjean and Esteban Ocon, meaning we were already in the points by the end of Sector 1. Now, that first lap was a real throwback to the early days of the F1 games, where the AI were incapable on lap 1, and we then made another move, this time on Kevin Magnussen at the start of lap 2. A move on Charles Leclerc was made pretty easy by the fact that we had DRS assistance as well. And, well, by the start of lap 3, we were in 8th. Getting P7 off Sergio Perez was a little bit more difficult, because despite going purple through Sector 2, the Mexican put up a brilliant fight, but we did manage to get the undercut on him to get up into 7th. Carlos Sainz was the last man to dispatch of who wasn't in the top 3 teams. And, well, sure enough, that was a pretty easy move to get up into P6 due to the immense power of our new engine. We hadn't given up hope of getting into the top 5 either, because Daniel Ricciardo and Lewis Hamilton were scrapping it out, and, well, we managed to close up onto their tail pretty quickly. Unfortunately, however, it was the final lap of the Grand Prix, and as we got onto the last DRS zone on lap 5, we couldn't even make a lunge. But still, I'd call that a pretty successful Grand Prix, going from P20, in the end, up to P5, because Daniel Ricciardo had also incurred a penalty. But it was our teammate who took victory, meaning that he extended his championship lead. But our P5 did soften the blow slightly. So it was only a 2-second penalty for Daniel Ricciardo, but it did ensure that we lost just the 15 points to our teammate Sebastian Vettel, who took victory ahead of Max Verstappen in P2. The gap was now 17 points, and we had just 5 more races to close that gap. And it was looking a little bit more difficult now. The Constructors' title was edging ever nearer, and we could actually wrap it up next time in Japan if results go our way. Talking of the Japanese Grand Prix, it is up next, and it was a very wet Suzuka which greeted us this weekend. Despite that, it was still Sebastian Vettel who managed to bang it on pole on Saturday, with ourselves lining up directly behind him in P3. The start was vital because we were 17 points behind Vettel, and even if he were to win from ourselves today, he would extend that lead to nearly a whole race victory. Fortunately, Daniel Ricciardo managed to get ahead of him before we'd even made it to turn 1. Then the two of them were scrapping it out with each other, which saw Ricciardo run wide, come back onto the track, but not before he'd lost the lead to ourselves. At the start of lap 2, our teammate Vettel was eager to get ahead of us, but again, he ran wide into turn 1, similar to how Ricciardo did, and he couldn't even recover it as he went through turn 2, meaning that Valtteri Bottas, who'd got up into P3, was now battling with our teammates, and as they went through the S section, the Mercedes man prevailed to get up into P2. That battle for P2 raged on in the next couple of laps, and Daniel Ricciardo, who got ahead of our teammate, looked as if he had dispatched of Bottas, who was really losing ground to ourselves. But Ricciardo ran wide into the following turn 1, allowing Bottas to get back up into P2. By this point, we had built quite a gap ahead of Valtteri Bottas, who was nearly 5 seconds behind due to the battling that he was doing. So with victory looking as if it was going to ourselves, Vettel made a lunge down the inside of Bottas into 130R to get up to make it a Ferrari 1-2. We took it very easy on the final lap, and the margin of victory, I think, flattered Vettel a little bit. But still, we managed to get those 7 points over him and get a race victory for the first time in this episode. So there we were, on top of the podium for the first time since Spa, and what a time to do it was. Bottas actually ended up in P5 in the end. I think he may have sustained some damage at some point in that battling, but yeah, we took victory ahead of our teammate, which was all that really mattered. So the gap was now down to 10 points, and it really was anyone's game as we got into the final 4 rounds of the season. As for the Constructors' Championship, it had finally been wrapped up with 4 races to spare. Ferrari are the Constructors' World Champions. Going into the USA then, it really was a possibility that we could take the championship lead back this weekend. But qualifying saw an unlikely Red Bull 1-2 headed by a Toro Rosso man, Brendan Hartley. I've no idea what happened there, but in the real battle, Vettel was ahead of ourselves in qualifying once more. So it was vital that we got ahead of Vettel before we'd reached turn 1. And as you can see, getting off the line, Hartley actually got a pretty good start in his Toro Rosso, as did Vettel, who'd already jumped Verstappen, but we had the inside line going into turn 1 and caught the other two napping, meaning that it was only Brendan Hartley standing between ourselves and P1. Now, Hartley has the accolade of leading a World Championship Grand Prix in this career mode, but we did dispatch of him as we went into turn 1, meaning that we also had a little bit of a buffer behind us. That didn't last long though. After Vettel had dispatched of both Verstappen and Hartley, he got ahead of us into turn 1 and parked it in the middle of the track. Maybe a little bit of revenge for Spa, where we pretty much did the reverse to him, meaning that we'd now accumulated front wing damage as well as being behind our teammate. Now, we really couldn't deal with the understeer. You can see here not being able to carry any speed into the penultimate turn. And as a result, Vettel took victory and extended the championship lead back to 17 points. It was going to take a big final 3 races from ourselves if we want the World Championship title. So Brendan Hartley actually managed to bring it home in P6, so not bad from him, to be fair. Ahead of Valtteri Bottas, who wasn't even in the top 10. But there you can see the all-important margin of 17 points. Yeah, it was going to take a big effort in these final 3 races. Next up then was the Mexican Grand Prix, a track which I haven't done a lot of driving on in the past few F1 games. And as we went into this Mexican Grand Prix, you can see that we were in fact the 3rd best team on the grid. Red Bull and Mercedes have brought more upgrades. We had some terrible luck in this part of the season. Every upgrade we seemed to bring was failing, meaning we had to spend more resource points on it, and it just wasn't going well. But we did manage to pull off a good qualifying. Once again, it was a random pole sitter. It was Roman Grosjean this time, but most importantly, we were ahead of our teammate. Now, we all know what a long run down to turn 1 it is here in Mexico, and that left us plenty of time to get ahead of Roman Grosjean. Unfortunately, we actually got ahead of him pretty soon, which meant that everyone else could just use our slipstream going into turn 1, and it really did turn into a disadvantage as our teammate Sebastian Vettel swept past us into turn 1, taking the lead of this Grand Prix. Now, we knew that a Vettel victory would pretty much confirm the title if he wasn't to make any mistakes in the final 2 rounds of the season, so we were really going for it even as early as lap 2, but Vettel was just not having any of it. At the end of the second straight, we once again went for it on at lap 2, but Vettel was just putting the car in all the right positions, meaning that we could not get past even if we tried. DRS was looking as if it was going to have to be our saviour, because at the start of lap 3 it was exactly the same situation again. Vettel placing the car in the right position in the corners, meaning we were going to have to get past him on at the straight. Now, throughout lap 3 we were actually saving our ERS so that we could go for a big lunge on lap 4. But even so, we were still closing in on Vettel, who was looking a little bit sketchy in this stadium section. And then at the start of lap 4, we'd saved all that ERS deployment, used the DRS and got ahead of him before we'd even made it to the braking zone to get up into a well-deserved P1. Now, Vettel couldn't use the DRS to his advantage in the final couple of laps of the race, and the fireworks were for us because we'd taken victory here in Mexico to decrease that gap back down to 10 points to Vettel. The top 3 drivers were all within a second of the race victory, with Bottas and Hamilton not too far away either, but most importantly, it was us that took victory. There you can see down to 10 points, and Hamilton was now over 100 behind either of the Ferrari drivers. So now into the final race of this episode, which was the Brazilian Grand Prix, the penultimate round of the season, and an important one once more for the championship. But once again, it was the Red Bull man, Max Verstappen, who took pole position ahead of Vettel, with ourselves sat there in P3. By this Grand Prix as well, we'd actually managed to surpass Red Bull in the performance chart, bringing an upgrade which had in fact failed for the last race, but it was oh so tight between those top 3 teams. So going to the 5 red lights, it was so important once more, just like every race, to get ahead of Vettel early doors, because he's been so good this season at just going off into the distance as soon as he gets a lead over ourselves. But he couldn't get ahead of Verstappen into turn 1, meaning that it was going to be a straight fight between ourselves and Vettel. We did get a poor exit though out of the centre S, meaning that we couldn't even challenge him into the end of Sector 1. As soon as that DRS was active though, we were right on at the tail of both Verstappen and Vettel. Vettel going for a move on the Red Bull man, which in fact ended up backfiring in the end. They were scrapping with each other, and now it looks as if we had a chance to get ahead of Vettel into the start of Sector 2, and it was a brave move down the inside. It was going to take something like that. A brilliant, brilliant manoeuvre. And with just 1 lap to go, we thought, you know what, we need to get some more points over Sebastian Vettel. If we were to get ahead of Verstappen, we'd be level on points going into the final round. And we were side by side with Verstappen, who then slowed in the exit of the centre S before turning in on us and taking our complete right side of the front wing off our car. How on earth were we going to get ahead of Verstappen, I thought, at this point? But we did manage to do so, and somehow the car managed to turn in to the start of Sector 2. Now at this point we knew that we were pretty screwed and probably going to lose the lead of the race, and sure enough, the Ferrari, which had more downforce on the car, managed to get ahead of us. That is of course Sebastian Vettel, but we would not go down without a fight. We went back ahead of him somehow. I don't know how we were doing this without any sort of front wing, but once again understeer on the exit, and this fast left-hander at the end of Sector 2 meant that Vettel swooped back inside of us and into P1 with just 1 sector to go. We got a warning for a collision with Vettel, but now it was just a run to the line. Who had the most juice in their batteries? It looked as if it was going to be us. We had the DRS and we were going to be side by side with Vettel to the end, but we take victory just about, and that could prove pivotal to the World Championship. Now that has got to feel like the sweetest victory of the season, just for the circumstances, you know, really backs against the wall stuff. And there you can see the margin of victory was just the 0.05 of a second, not too much in the end. You know, just your standard race with Verstappen at 0.3 of a second behind. And now, as you see in the championship, 3 points is the gap. It really is anyone's race. Now we have more race victories than Vettel, meaning that we can end up finishing level on points with him and still win the title. So we've got the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix tomorrow, and there you have the full race results of all 20 races so far this season. We've got 1 to go, and we have had 8 victories this season. Vettel has had 7, Lewis Hamilton's had just the 1, Valtteri Bottas just the 1, that came this episode, Ricciardo with 2, and then Sergio Perez with, of course, that victory in Azerbaijan, which was quite a bizarre race. But yeah, join me tomorrow for the finale of this Season 1 of Career Mode. I'll see you guys then. Take care. Bye-bye.